Well, as you may have heard in our news headlines already on this Wednesday morning, a Manitoba First Nations chief is going to sit on the new Hockey Canada Indigenous Advisory Circle. In a statement on their website, Hockey Canada says the circle, quote, is an important step in our reconciliation efforts. It adds that the IAC will help form policies and practices related to the calls to action outlined in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. So Birdtail Sioux Dakota Nation Chief Trechelle Bunn is one of 10 representatives on this advisory circle, and one of 3 Manitobans, in fact. Brianne Dondo from Red River Métis Nation and Kevin Monkman from Ebb and Flow with the Wew'suwet'en Wolverines of the MJHL have also all been named to the IAC. She spoke with up-to-speed guest host Marjorie Dowhouse, Chief Bunn that is, yesterday.
First, tell us more about the new Indigenous Advisory Circle. What conversations will you be having with Hockey Canada?
Yeah, I think it's a very important step forward for Hockey Canada to be creating the Indigenous Advisory Circle and to have such a diverse group of individuals from all across the country to really work with them to implement the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action that are specific to sport, so calls to action 87 to 91. So I think working towards actioning those calls to action will be really a really vital part of our work as the Indigenous Advisory Circle.
From what I understand, this is the first time that a group like this has been set up within a sports organization. Why is it important to have this set up within Hockey Canada?
Yeah, I think, I think every year you come across different news stories and different individuals sharing their stories about a lot of the barriers that our Indigenous peoples and communities are facing when it comes to hockey. And as a hockey player growing up and facing racism and being on teams, sometimes it's the only Indigenous player. I think Hockey Canada is really leading the way in how making Canada's game more inclusive. So I think it's just the start of very, very important conversations going forward.
You're one of 10 members who have been named to the IAC. How does it feel to be part of this newly formed group?
It's a huge honor. I think, there's going to be a lot of groundwork that has to be done, especially since it's the first inaugural kind of Hockey Canada Indigenous Advisory Circle. So I'm really looking forward to the work ahead. And I think I'm familiar with quite a few of the individuals who are also named to the circle. So it'll be really important to build those strong relationships with everyone in the group. And I know that we have a great group to do the important work that lies ahead.
How did you end up getting named to the circle?
I actually spoke at a hockey conference that was hosted this past early spring through my legal studies and a kind of a paper that I had wrote during my first year of law school. And when I was speaking on this panel at this hockey conference, I think some folks from Hockey Canada and Hockey Manitoba were in the audience, and they reached out to me and shared with me the posting about the Indigenous Advisory Circle, and they really kind of told me I should put my name forward and look into applying. So I did, and it's a huge honor to be selected. So I know there's so many amazing voices from all across Canada, and I'm honored to be selected as one of them.
And how does it feel, because you're one of 3 Manitobans, how does it feel to know that Manitoba is very well represented in this group?
Yeah, I think it's a huge honor, and it's really great to be able to see those 3 other Manitobans a part of this circle. And I'm familiar with both of them, and they're both amazing individuals. So I think it's great to have Manitoba representation on this national circle.
Now, as you mentioned, you have a sports background. You've played hockey for the U of M Bisons, for Team Manitoba. How do you think your role in hockey and being a past player yourself will help you in this new role?
Yeah, I think it'll really bring that kind of lived experience as a First Nations hockey player to the circle. It's been a real pleasure for me to transition from being a player to kind of taking more kind of advisory roles on, and now that I'm no longer playing the game competitively. So it's been a great way to transition from the game and still give back to the game that has given me so much. So I'm very excited to apply my lived experience to the circle.
Now, it sounds like the circle is actually going to be getting to work right away. Your first meeting is coming up. What are you looking forward to at that first meeting?
Yeah, I think it's just so exciting to be able to see it come to fruition and to be in a room with so many amazing individuals from the circle and, of course, the Hockey Canada board and get to know everyone and kind of create a path forward for all the important work that lies ahead.
That's Trechelle Bunn, the chief of the Birdtail Sioux Dakota Nation and also one of the members of the new Hockey Canada Indigenous Advisory Circle. Next on the show, imagine this. You're at a dinner party with friends, and you notice that one of them is recording your conversation. It sounds like an invasion of privacy, but Canadian law offers little protection for others at that table. These days, these kinds of recordings are far more likely with this new generation of wearable AI devices that are designed to record everything within earshot. Here's CBC's Manjula Selvarajah this morning, our tech columnist, to look at the growing issue that was first broadcast. This piece was first broadcast in June of this year.
Media executive Syria Grell was at a dinner in Vancouver after a day at a tech conference when she found herself staring at a small black pendant.
We're having pizza, we're having a drink, we're having a gossip and a chat. And about halfway through, one of the attendees mentioned that he was wearing something around his neck, and he took it off and he put it on the table.
Grell is the CEO of BetaKit, a digital publication focused on Canadian tech and innovation.
And it's an AI device, listening device, referred to it as sort of an ambient scribe, which is how people are talking about this. It's little sort of devices that record what's going on.
From the photo Grell posted on social media, it looks like a wearable by Limitless AI. The company pitches their pendant as a device to help users become more productive. It listens to you all day and then uses artificial intelligence to help you draw insights, recall important details, develop to-do lists, and more. For people with disabilities or those who struggle with memory, it could be a boon. For Syria Grell...
So yeah, I think it definitely makes you rethink your conversations. And basically what ensued was a really fascinating conversation. There were some real leaders of the sector at the table kind of working through, I think, what we're all going to have to work through as a society of how do we feel about this? What sort of obligations are there to disclose?
It's a question I put to Frederick Wilson. He's a partner at the law firm Borden Ladner Gervais and co-lead of the privacy and cybersecurity practice.
So in Canadian criminal law, it's legal to record a conversation to which you are party to. You don't need to disclose that you're recording. You don't need to get consent.
It's called the one-party consent rule. You can record a conversation as long as one of the parties involved provides consent. So if the wearer consents, they don't need the approval of anyone else at that table.
But it's illegal to record a conversation you're not a party to, which is often called eavesdropping.
So what then about people at neighboring tables? This is where it gets murky.
And I think when you read the fine print, it really pushes the responsibility on the users to make sure they only record the conversations that the users are party to. And as long as we don't have, technological guarantees that it won't incidentally eavesdrops on other conversation, it remains a risk.
And regardless of the one-party consent rule, Wilson warns that people should be careful about using such recorders in the workplace because other privacy laws may apply. There are other portable AI assistants in the market and about to debut. The Rabbit R1, Plod Note, Friend from Friend.com, and Bee. OpenAI is reported to be working on one with former legendary Apple designer Johnny Ive. Timlahin Ojo says devices which offer constant monitoring can have a chilling effect on free speech.
There are times when you just want to have a conversation. You want to speak your mind freely without any form of question, without any form of thought of what the repercussions could be. But all of that is lost now because you need to double check.
Ojo is the Privacy, Surveillance and Digital Rights Coordinator at the Canadian Civil Liberties Association.
People become much more apprehensive, withdrawn. It erodes the trust in society.
But Ojo says this isn't just about the privacy concerns of others, but also the wearer.
The big point of expectation of privacy has substantially diminished by virtue of some of these technologies, because even being alone doesn't guarantee that you're not being eavesdropped upon and your thoughts are not being used. Data security and access, where is it being stored? Who has access to the data? What's the possibility of a potential misuse?
So users need to understand what these companies say they'll do with the data they collect, how it may be used to train AI models, and what happens if the company goes under. But who reads the fine print on user agreements anyway, if the specifics are even mentioned there? It brings to mind the story of the genetic testing company 23andMe. In 2025, as the firm struggled financially and then filed for bankruptcy, consumers worried about the plight of their data. Frederick Wilson says privacy lawyers are looking to Parliament Hill for privacy reforms to reflect new technologies. The last effort to do so, Bill C-27, died when Parliament was prorogued in January.
For the public, I just hope that regulators will have the capacity to issue guidance on, what to look for when you buy these products.
Until then, weigh the benefits of these gadgets before inviting them into your life and inadvertently the lives of others. For CBC Radio, I'm Manjula Selvarajah.
It's interesting, especially that idea of, the fact that you could be recorded pretty much anywhere. Now, there are, as you heard, though, rules about broadcasting any of those recordings, which we know well as journalists, but I'm not sure the average person always knows that. I know I've caught myself in some audio of myself captured that will pop up here or there, and I sometimes wish people would ask. But the reality is tech devices are all around us. Well, next on the show, as you've been hearing on local news, but also in detail on World Report, Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand says that Canada will open a new consulate in Greenland's capital this week. Canada has not sent a high-level minister to Greenland in years. Many view the diplomatic move as a bid for closer relations with other Arctic nations. At a media conference yesterday, Anand was asked what she hopes to accomplish with the move.
Canada is an Arctic nation. 70% of our coastline, 40% of our landmass is interfacing with the Arctic. We have an Arctic foreign policy. The Arctic foreign policy contemplates greater engagement not just in Canada's north, but internationally as well. And so when we open a consulate in Greenland, we are expanding Canada's diplomatic footprint in another Arctic region. I've had numerous conversations with other foreign ministers of Arctic countries, and we all agree that now is the time to ensure that our collective will and footprint is placed in Arctic territory. Canada's recent budget delivered just last week around $80 billion in defense spending. We are going to reach 2% this year and 5% of GDP by 2035. Much of that spending is going to involve dual-use infrastructure in the Canadian Arctic. Ports, roads, railways. But from a foreign minister's standpoint, my concern is not only on the implementation of those commitments, but also the broader work we can do internationally to ensure that we are collaborating and cooperating with other Arctic nations in support of global peace and security. That's the reason.
So that was Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand speaking yesterday as she was kicking off the G7 Foreign Ministers meeting in Ontario. It is a bit unsettling to think about, but bad things can be happening to our bodies when we are sleeping. There is a new study out that says sleep apnea is associated with a greater risk for microbleeds in the brain. So that can mean faster brain aging through the years. Dr. Bhardwaj is here to get us up to speed on those findings, but also what we can do about it. Good morning.
Good morning, Marcy.
So I've done plenty of interviews on sleep apnea, but this study sounds obviously worrying. For those, though, that don't sort of know what it is, can we start there? What is sleep apnea?
Sure, yeah. So obstructive sleep apnea, it's a condition where your breathing stops for short periods of time while you're sleeping. Basically when some people are asleep, the muscles around their throat and their tongue might relax to the point where they sort of collapse shut and then air can't get through. That's the obstructive part of obstructive sleep apnea. There's also this thing called central sleep apnea, where the signal to breathe that comes from your brain isn't actually working properly, but that's much less common than obstructive sleep apnea. So those throat and tongue muscles, they relax, your airways shut, you stop breathing for a few seconds. And then your brain senses that, oh, your oxygen level is dropping, your carbon dioxide level is going up. So it partially wakes you up. And usually it's not a full wake up. It's just enough to open your airway, kind of gasp for air, and then fall back asleep. And that cycle repeats itself through the night, sometimes like dozens of times every minute kind of thing. So hundreds of times per night. And most people don't remember waking up at all, but they realize that their sleep quality is terrible. So obstructive sleep apnea it's pretty common. Some studies say about 15% of people have it. Other studies say maybe up to 30% of people. But most people are not diagnosed, even though, again, they might figure that they've got it.
How would someone know or suspect they have obstructive sleep apnea? Like, what are the clues?
Yeah, so one of the big clues is snoring. Right? So people might know that they snore, or somebody else might tell them, their bed partner, their roommate might say, hey, you snore really, really loud. And not only do you snore, but you make these gasping or choking noises through the night where you kind of wake up almost, but you're not actually awake. Now, not everyone who snores has sleep apnea, but it is one of the clues. People with sleep apnea might also notice that they wake up super tired. They got 7 or 8 hours in bed, but they're still tired through the day. So daytime sleepiness is a big clue. So if you're falling asleep in a meeting, it might not just be the boring meeting. Same if you're really needing a daytime nap most days. And then there are some risk factors that you can take into consideration as well. Obstructive sleep apnea is more common in men, more common in people over 50, more common if you're carrying extra weight. And here's an interesting one. If your shirt collar size is more than 16 inches, that's actually associated with an increased risk of sleep apnea.
That's interesting for sure. The new study now, it suggests sleep apnea, as we said, can be associated with some big health consequences like premature brain aging. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so this study looked at the health records of over 1,400 men and women. Their average age was around 58, and they had overnight sleep studies, so they were, properly diagnosed their sleep apnea. And they also had MRI brain scans at the beginning of the study, and then 4 years in, and then 8 years in. And what the researchers were looking for was, is there an association between either mild or moderate to severe sleep apnea and microbleeds in the brain over time that show up on the MRI. And they found that over 8 years, the risk of having those tiny bleeds in your brain was more than double if a person had moderate to severe sleep apnea compared to if they had no sleep apnea or even mild sleep apnea. So we're talking overall risk in people with only mild or no sleep apnea at all. The overall risk was about 3% that they would end up with microbleeds over 8 years as they aged. But if you had moderate to severe sleep apnea, it was more like 7%. So, like I said, more than double. So that's after the researchers had controlled for all sorts of other things, high blood pressure, diabetes, cholesterol levels, things like that. So they figured that moderate to severe sleep apnea is associated with this increased risk of microbleeds. And those tiny bleeds, they might not give you any big symptoms when they happen. It's not like you wake up and it's like you've had a stroke where you can't speak or can't move part of your body. But over time, they accelerate brain aging and dementia.
Why would sleep apnea be associated with more of those tiny bleeds in the brain?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of possible reasons or mechanisms, right? So remember, first of all, sleep apnea causes interruptions in your breathing that drops your oxygen level. So that might be a reason. Your brain cells might not be getting enough oxygen. And then another thing that goes along with sleep apnea is little spikes of your blood pressure through the night. And that might be causing the tiny little blood vessels to burst from the high pressure. And then there's also this idea that if you've got low oxygen, high blood pressure fluctuations, all this stuff going on, that might lead to more inflammation, more stress on the blood vessel walls, and that can make them weaker, more likely to bleed. And the big thing about this is it's not something that we're sort of seeing and saying, well, oh well, this is treatable. Obstructive sleep apnea is treatable. So if we can find people who are having these, breathing interruptions during their sleep and treat their sleep apnea, we might be able to change how their brain changes or ages over the years, and maybe even prevent or delay things like dementia as they age.
Let's talk about CPAP machines that people might know. You know, you put that on your face. It's got hoses. It'll help you in the evening. Is that how sleep apnea is treated, though?
Yeah, so the hard part actually is getting properly diagnosed with a sleep study. It can be a long wait for that. And then there's 2 or 3 sort of sets of treatment. So there are little mouth guards and masks mouth guardy type things that you can wear that help to either pull your jaw forward or your tongue forward, make it less likely for your airway to collapse shut. That usually works better in mild sleep apnea and only in some people. There's surgical options where they actually try to carve out a piece of your airway to increase the size of your airway. But like you said, the best, most effective treatment is this thing called a CPAP machine. It stands for continuous positive airway pressure. So there's a mask that you wear over your nose or your nose and mouth. It's attached to a gentle air compressor about the size of a Kleenex box. And basically it is blowing this gentle flow of pressurized air into your airway to keep it propped open with air, kind of like the how air keeps a balloon inflated. So with your airway propped open with that positive airway pressure, you stop having the tissues collapse shut. So you stop having the breathing pauses. So your oxygen levels don't drop. You don't get the spikes in blood pressure. You get a better sleep. In the short run, you wake up feeling much more rested and rejuvenated. And in the long run, you've got a lower likelihood of, heart and lung problems and blood pressure issues and stuff. And, according to this study, maybe fewer microbleeds in your brain and maybe less likelihood of dementia as you get older. So if somebody's sort of looking at you, as you listen to this saying, you snore really, really loud, you have gasping, for air in the middle of the night, please take that to heart. Talk to your doctor about sleep apnea. If you get diagnosed or if you have been diagnosed, but you've been, sort of out of the habit of using your CPAP machine, consider getting it up and running again because your brain will thank you.
All right, Dr. Bhardwaj, thank you.
My pleasure.
That's our medical column and Dr. Raj Bhardwaj, who is an emergency room doctor in Alberta. We are seeing green and yellow and red and purple and all kinds of colors over the sky. Early this morning and late into last night, the photos of the Aurora Borealis, the northern lights, are absolutely incredible. You've been sending dozens of them to us. We're sharing some of them on our live stream this morning if you're watching us there on YouTube, and we hope you are. We'll continue to add photos through the morning. But we got photos from you from Dauphin to Lorette through Winnipeg, over in Brandon, coming in from Martin Landy and Corey Williams. Photos taken outside of your towns, over your houses in the city, over the lakes in Manitoba. Just gorgeous displays last night. So thanks to everyone who sent photos. Our own Abby Adiyemi is always out late taking pics too, so some of these are coming from him. But I want to explain what happened here because across Canada, you're going to see photos this morning that really are stunning. There were severe solar storms that had been predicted, and we were told these could be coming to show off the northern lights. It means the sun is putting out bursts of energy called coronal mass ejections. They did reach Earth Tuesday night and early into this morning. So these storms actually, besides producing amazing northern lights, can actually cause severe geomagnetic disruptions when they happen. In 1859, a severe solar storm triggered auroras as far south as Hawaii. It set telegraph lines on fire in a rare event. In 1972, it may have detonated, a solar storm, detonated magnetic U.S. sea mines off the coast of Vietnam. But in the sky, they create this stunning display. So sky gazers were watching this last night. The lights, northern lights happening deeper into Canada and the States and Europe. What's happening is the sun is going through a major facelift, for lack of a better term. Every 11 years, the poles swap places, and that caused the magnetic twists and tangles all along the way. So that's why it happened. The sun's at its maximum phase in this 11-year activity cycle. What it's resulted in, though, is stunning pics. If you want to send more, radio893@cbc.ca. We'll get them on YouTube. Just the flashes of red across the sky last night. This photos are just absolutely beautiful. I won't do them justice on the radio. The greens dancing up into the sky. And as I said, just perfect purples framed by trees over what looks to be Lake Winnipeg here. That one's coming in from a listener named Corey. So thank you, everyone, for all of your photos. We'll get more of them up as we go. And what a show that we had over the sky last night in Manitoba. That it is also the 80th birthday of Neil Young today. The iconic folk artist has had, of course, a prolific career. It's taken him all around the world, but he has roots here in Winnipeg. In fact, he spent part of his youth in a house on Grosvenor Avenue. Our next guest didn't know that when he bought it, but John Kiernan has now been living in the house for 25 years now. Hey, John.
Good morning, Marcy.
So were you a fan of Neil Young before you bought his house? I can't recall. Or did you buy the house and become an obligatory fan of Neil Young?
I think you have to be a fan if you live in Neil Young's house. But no, I appreciated his music before, and I kind of, in fact, grown up with it to some degree. So it was a unique coincidence. Once as we bought the house, there was a small note posted about something on a wall. We read it more carefully when we moved in and realized it was a place Neil had lived while he was going to high school at Calvin.
You and I have spoken before about you being in this iconic house in Winnipeg, but on his 80th birthday, I thought we better check in. How often do people stop by, or over the years have they stopped by because it is, his former childhood home?
Well, I say people do. They're all very respectful. Lots of people show up and get their picture taken in front of the house. It's on the trolley bus tour that goes around in the summers, and they stop in front about 1 or 2 times a day. But people are great, and it happens often. We used to say we could tell when a conference was in town because groups of people would suddenly hop out of a cab, get their picture taken in front of the house, and then leave. It's sort of that one of those Winnipeg sites that if you're here, you'd like to take in.
When you think about back in the day, it wasn't just fans stopping by. I guess the most significant moment is something you missed. I always hate bringing this up. But Neil Young stopped by the house and you weren't home?
He did. I guess he was here and he was kind of touring and showing to his partner, his wife, where he grew up and some of the sites. We were out. We got a call from the neighbor saying, "I think Neil Young's standing in your front yard with it looks like Daryl Hannah." And we laughed and said, "That's great, but we're out grocery shopping." It seems we do that every time someone famous stops by. But yeah, so he was here, and I think he was just, a little bit of reminiscing. Came to our house and apparently went off to Crestwood Community Center, then Earl Grey. So he has his own life. We just happen to live in a house that he once lived in. So I would say it's certainly not about me.
Yeah. Now, that was in 2019 when you missed Neil Young. Why did you say there we seem to be grocery shopping every time someone famous stops by?
Well, we had and it's probably, 15, 20 years ago when Bob Dylan stopped by. Same sort of thing. And we were out grocery shopping, came back, and he was standing in front of the house. So we get certainly a variety of people from sort of Dylan and Neil. And I say that like we're personal friends, but we're not. But we had some people were by last week. They were going up to see the polar bears in Trechelle from Germany. They stopped by and had their picture taken. And again, it's just those random things when you're in and out. People are standing on the sidewalk. They got the picture of the house in the background. I think everyone kind of remembers their high school years, good, bad, or indifferent. So it kind of resonates with people and probably with others too.
Now that you're saying that about Dylan, I have somewhere in my mind going, "Oh yeah, I forgot," because it was such a great story, but maybe not for you. I don't know if it means you shouldn't grocery shop anymore, John, or what, but.
We did not, I have to be honest, I did not realize the interest people had in both of those artists, in their lives, in their background, in the context of how perhaps they developed before they wrote their songs. So, I'm a fan too. So I'm appreciative of knowing a little bit of those and have become more educated by living in the house itself.
Tell me a little bit about what your favorite tunes. Obviously, he turns 80 today, and his tunes have, they've changed over the years, his music, but he always has that, his telltale sound. What is it that draws you to Neil Young?
Well, first, happy birthday to Neil, and to use his own words, long may he run. I think for me, there's a melancholy component. Great guitarist, great rocker, but his lyrics really capture in a couple of lines some intrinsic feelings. And for me, there's a melancholiness to his writing, be it Unknown Legend, Like a Hurricane, even Heart of Gold, Needle and Damage Done. There's a number of those songs that are also quite poignant. And so I think that's what I appreciate about him as a fan.
You're open to the fans stopping by. As you said just this week, folks, here to see polar bears took time to be outside the house of Neil Young where you live and take a pic. Not everyone might feel the same way. Has it ever bothered you? Because I'm just imagining people, getting off the tour bus, as you said, and there they are.
Well, the tour bus slows down more, so it's not sort of this intake. Then they head off. I think they have a schedule. But, we've gotten used to it, and it's not often. And people are great. They have an interest. They don't bother us. The house is not a museum. We live here, so they're being very respectful about that. And they just have a curiosity about the context around Neil Young and the years he spent in Winnipeg. And where he did live. And this is one of the locations. I used to say, time's moved on, but keep in context that 35 years ago, he lived here for, 35 months. But
Yeah.
it's that interest part, as I said, about high school and those developmental years.
Thanks a lot for your time this morning on Neil Young's 80th birthday, John. Thanks for giving us the update.
No, happy to. And long distance, happy birthday to him.
John Kiernan with us, Winnipegger living in the house that Neil Young grew up in. Well, when it comes to breakfast foods, often with coffee, you might have toast, you might have a muffin, you might have, yogurt or berries. But when it comes to the starches of the world, you might also have a bagel. The question is, how far would you go to perfect a recipe for a bagel? Pretty far, it turns out, for a Winnipeg father-daughter duo. They traveled the world to learn about traditional bagel making. And now they're sharing what they learned with the rest of Winnipeg. Next on the show, a business story. Their new bagel shop opens Saturday in Winnipeg. CBC's Sophia Peralta-Barone spoke with the co-owners this week.
My name is Glen Demetrioff. I'm the co-owner with my daughter of the Forge Bagel Company. Opening day is on November 15th, and we are very excited. Baking has been always a stress release for me, but it's always been this fascination but distraction from everyday life and pressure. But there was something about this particular bagel style that I was starting to make that was just different.
So our bagels float on impact because they're pre-proofed. Most bagels will sink.
My grandmother was born in Poland. We said, this is where it all started. And if we're going to go someplace in this world, we're going to go to the place where it started. And that's why we went to Poland. So countries we went to Poland, we went to the UK, we went to the US obviously, but New York and LA, and in Canada, Montreal, Toronto.
Still isn't really stretchy.
The Polish trip probably was the most eye-opening for us in a way that we realized that the traditional Polish method of making a bagel, which was called a poke and stretch, which you have a ball of dough, you poke a finger in it and you stretch it. It becomes incredibly soft and chewy. So you get this lovely, bite through it. Everyone's rope style in it, which is fine. They make great bagels. But is there a place for an artisan style which goes back to the original roots of how bagels are made? And can we make that texture, and will people appreciate it now? Our bagel was inspired by two places. One in Poland, which is the poke and stretch method, and then the UK, which is inclusion-based. Inclusions are ingredients that you put into the dough. We have a lemon poppy seed. We have a strawberry shortcake. We have a double blueberry. There's a lot of new things that we had to learn, and Rachelle, who's really the project person behind the operation here, she really helped keep this project going and allowed us to actually open.
Poke it in the middle.
Make sure you do it right. Touch your well.
I think we complement each other really well. I call him the bagel alchemist. He experiments in the kitchen all the time, and he can do his crafting and his artisan baking. But I just try and keep everything else going.
It's very uplifting for me personally because it brings back my grandmother. It brings back all the things that I heard about from my grandmother when she was growing up in Poland early years. The fact that I was able to do this with my daughter, that really is the winning recipe for me.
Company, a new business opening in Winnipeg, set to open on Saturday on St. Anne's Road. Well, next on CBC, we have a special report, but a caution that it may affect those who've experienced sexual violence or know someone affected by it. Next week, as you've been hearing in the news, a specially appointed federal task force will release the results of their investigation into how the courts treat sex assault cases, and more specifically, the survivors at the heart of them. But one doesn't have to look to Ottawa to know that for many survivors, justice is hard to come by. CBC producer Donna Carreiro has been looking into the issue, and she joins us in studio with her report. Good morning.
Hi there, Marcy. So, full disclosure, this is a story I've been looking at for decades. Ever since I became a journalist and I started to cover sex assault trials, I noticed very quickly that more often than not, they ended up in acquittals. And I also noticed in those cases, no surprise, that the survivors left behind were shattered because in their minds, of course, the crime had been committed. And yet, in the eyes of the law, that just wasn't enough, which got me to thinking, has anything changed? And the answer, according to Stats Canada, is no.
So what do the numbers say then?
Okay, so first, and this is according to the latest numbers that Stats Canada had available, it's estimated that here in Canada, more than 900,000 people a year are sexually assaulted, but fewer than 6% of them will go to police. And of those who do, only a third will end up in charges being laid. And of those who are charged, fewer than half will end up in convictions. So I'm going to do the math for you and make this easy. Of those original 900,000 victims that we talked about, fewer than 500,000 will actually get justice in the courts.
So I'm just going to repeat the numbers again, just because they're really something. So, and I just want to make sure they're correct. So of those original 900,000 victims, fewer than 5,000?
Correct.
Wow. What does it mean for the survivors left behind?
Well, I'm going to let Jewel Pierre Roselli answer that one for you.
What else is there to lose? I'm already, I lost jobs, I lost friends, I lost relationships, I lost that self-love for myself because of what someone did to me.
So she's talking about what happened after she was sexually assaulted late one night back in September of 2023. She'd run into a professional acquaintance at a social. He wanted to party with her afterwards, but she said no. She was drunk. She was tired. She just wanted to go home. But he didn't drive her home. He drove past it and headed for the perimeter highway.
He's much larger than me. Most likely stronger than me, right? And we're on the perimeter. There's no one around. Even if I tried to fight and survive or whatever, I just knew that I probably wouldn't win.
What did happen next?
Well, he took her to a motel, she doesn't know where, and he sexually assaulted her. And as soon as she could, she escaped. She called for help.
I don't want to say it's forever burned into my head, but I remember because I was scared I was going to end up at the landfill and no one would look for me. As an Indigenous woman, that's such a reality.
So from there, she did everything a victim of crime is supposed to do. She went to the hospital for treatment. She went to the police. She gave a statement. It wasn't enough. 5 months later, she got a phone call from the Crown Attorney.
And she said, based on the evidence that you've submitted, we don't feel it's enough for him to be charged. And then she said, so it's over.
So no charges. Why?
So the biggest issue, Marcy, is usually around consent. Is there enough admissible evidence that she didn't give consent? She was scared. She was intoxicated. She was intimidated. That's all true. But is there enough evidence legally to prove that in court?
You have to be like big, huge neon signs or something like that in order for the courts to believe that you didn't want it.
So that's Isabel Daniels. She works with survivors of sexual violence and intimate partner violence here in Winnipeg.
People do not understand what it's like to be a woman in a situation with a person that can overpower you, with a situation where we have multiple people being discarded like garbage, where we have women that are not making it home because of homicide, rape.
Daniels, however, does understand that feeling, Marcy, because she's also a survivor.
The perpetrator often has more rights than the victim. You know, they don't have to prove they didn't do that. We have to prove that they did.
Let's talk about that. How do you prove that you did not consent?
Yeah, that's a big one. Okay, so take, for example, Jules' case. Not only did she not want it, she made it clear that she was too drunk. She just wanted to go home. She actually even shared text messages with police stating that she had told the accused just that.
And that wasn't enough.
Well, there's a lot of mixed messaging out there. So here, for example, is what the province has to say about consent when it comes to sex assault and alcohol. Quote, if you are drinking or high on drugs and unable to make a decision, you are unable to legally give consent, end quote. And this, according to the RCMP, quote, consent is not feeling pressured, confused, scared, drunk, or high, end quote. All of which pertain to Jewel and often pertains to a lot of victims. But proving that with legally admissible evidence is another story. Chantal Boutin is with the Crown's office here in Manitoba.
A person saying I'm intoxicated doesn't immediately result in an inability to consent.
It has to be either unconscious or so impaired they could not understand or assess the danger, and there might not be enough evidence, again, to prove that in court beyond a reasonable doubt.
And so part of the task of the trier of fact is to determine that. What evidence can be called in support of that level of intoxication?
So what do you do if there isn't enough evidence available?
Okay, so that's a really, really good question, Marcy. So if there isn't enough evidence available, right, either charges aren't laid or the accused isn't convicted. And Chantal Boutin says that's the key issue. They've got to make sure that any evidence that's been gathered will stand the test of the law. Will it hold up in court? And if they don't think it will, they can't, in good faith, proceed with laying charges. Which is not to say they don't believe the victims. Chantal says they do believe the victims. Regardless, not having their day in court can have a huge impact on those victims.
Hugely destructive. Hugely destructive.
So that's Alexa Barkley. The first time she was sexually assaulted back in Ontario, she was 13. The accused was acquitted because she couldn't prove she didn't give consent.
To survive, because we were talking about somebody that was older than me, I felt like I had no options to get away from him. I just laid there and waited for it to be over. So then that whole consent conversation comes up again. Well, you didn't push him off. You didn't say no. Well, except I had told him no originally, and he went ahead and did it anyways.
You said this was the first time she was sexually assaulted.
That's right. The second time, again, back in Ontario, the accused, this time it was her pastor. He was convicted, but he only got house arrest, and he successfully appealed that.
The system is designed to protect the perpetrator, and it does function exactly as it should. The system is working exactly as it's designed, and it never favors the survivor.
So today, Alexa advocates for survivors like Jewel and Isabel with something called EVE. It stands for End Violence Everywhere, and it's an international nonprofit agency for survivors of violence.
We're so often disbelieved and villainized in a lot of cases as if, it's fun to make false reports. And so, to come to a place where you hear you are believed and also you are not alone is enormous. That's a big part of what my job is.
So she will obviously be looking at the report and recommendations. Just to go back where we started, they're going to come out of Ottawa next week.
Well, actually, absolutely. Absolutely, Marcy. In fact, she was one of the contributors to the task force research.
Commit suicide because of these assaults. And some of us just never live life again. They're just trying to survive day to day with their mental health. They're trying to not be a victim again. They're trying to live as if they, like they did before the incident. And for a lot of us, that's not possible. Especially when there was no justice in the court system.
I want to ask you before you go, Donna, and I kind of already know the answer, but it speaks to this. I'm guessing it wasn't difficult to find all of these women who share this same thread through where they feel like they just couldn't get justice. Sadly, right, when we started with those enormous numbers.
Absolutely. In fact, Marcy, I spoke to many, many, many survivors, some of whom weren't able to share their story publicly, but there was a common denominator amongst all of them. Yes.
We'll see if the report next week will change the trajectory of all this in our country. Thanks for coming in.
You're very welcome.
So that is CBC producer Donna Carreiro. Tomorrow, we will continue this series as well. We have an interview with 2 Winnipeg Crown attorneys. So we heard a bit of one of them today in Donna's piece, but they're going to walk us through the court process and also the challenges of trying cases of sexual violence. And then that will all set us up to look to next week to put that against the findings of this report. So we can, as I mentioned, do better in this country. Well, May 26, 2022 was a day that rocked the Canadian hockey landscape. That is when TSN senior correspondent and investigative reporter Rick Westhead broke the news. He broke the story of 5 NHL players who were accused of sexually assaulting a young woman known as EM, as I mentioned, in a London, Ontario hotel room at a Hockey Canada gala. For over 3 years, that story ignited debate and discussion about Hockey Canada culture. And even after the players were acquitted of all charges this July, the conversation continues. Well, Rick is taking a deep dive and a deep look at hockey culture in his new book. It's called We Breed Lions, Confronting Canada's Troubled Hockey Culture. He will be in Winnipeg at the end of the month to launch the book, but I had a long conversation with him about it last week.
Hey, good morning.
So tell me a little bit about this. You to put this together, you talked to 58 former junior hockey players to work on the book. What were those conversations like?
Well, it's interesting. The 58, I actually wanted to make sure that they were current players because I realized that if this book was full of stories from the 1990s or earlier, that it would be too easy for people within hockey to dismiss it and to say, well, that's how things used to be, but things are so much better now. So I really focused on talking to guys who have played either Tier 2 Junior A or major junior hockey within the last 10 years. And their stories, the kind of the through line that ran through all of them was how much they love hockey. But all of these men also talked about how they saw real issues with the system. They talked about how hard it is to be 14, 15, 16 years old, moving away from their family homes, trying to fit in locker rooms with junior teams where they're playing with 20-year-old men, sometimes even older, and how tough it is to resist having to conform and basically do whatever it takes to fit in.
There's a former player, I'll read a quote here. There's many, of course, as we outlined, but who said to you, quote, "When we look around the room, we see 20 clones of ourselves and we all know we are better than everyone else. This is our culture. We breed lions," thus the title. "How do you tell a lion to stop being a lion?" End quote. What does that actually mean when you dug into this? You have so many examples of how these young players, as you mentioned, who are, really 14, 15, 16 are elevated.
I think it means that they live by, and they often live by different rules than the rest of society because they're exceptional at playing this game that we all love. One of the other quotes in the book that really has stood out to people and who've contacted me is from Alison Forsyth. And, she's been on CBC a lot. She's an amazing woman, a former Canadian Olympic skier who's been very public about her own sexual assault. And she now works to educate sports programs and schools across Canada. And she pointed out to me, there's a reason that hotels don't want to take reservations from minor hockey teams. You look around the restaurant in these hotels, and you've got kids in their hockey tracksuits putting salt and pepper and pizza and paper napkins, jamming them into their drinks, acting crazy. And she says, these hockey coaches want these boys wearing their suits to the games because, when a 9-year-old wears a suit to a game, it shows respect for the game. And Allison's point is, well, what about respect? Look around. What about respect for the server that's trying to bring you your lunch right now. And of course, that's not for every team, and we're not talking about everyone being in that situation. But certainly, the response I've heard is that's a story that people have seen played out time and again.
You write about a trip to Sweden where you went to see how junior hockey players are developed there. What were some of the main differences that are key to how players are developed here?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me that. In Sweden, I spent time with a player who's 14 years old, and scouts told me about him and said that he's the best player of his age in the country. And he played for a team called Djurgården, just outside of Stockholm. And here's what's interesting. Even though so many of the pro teams around Sweden wanted him to commit to come and stay in a residence with, where they are located and play for their club team, in Sweden, the boys have the choice to either stay at home and play, for their local team and live with their families, or move away. And in this case, this young player named Dorian decided to actually stay. And in his words, he said, I want to stay where my mom and dad are. And you can see how in Sweden, again, the families have this choice. If you are an elite minor hockey player in Canada and you will be drafted, you'll either be drafted into the Western Hockey League or the Ontario Hockey League or the Quebec Maritime Junior Hockey League, and the choice of where to play is really out of your hands. There is more choice now with more players going to play in the United States at college hockey. Nevertheless, if you want to play junior, the team that drafts you has the right to you, and you really have no choice except to leave your home in many cases.
I'll ask you about that maybe being part of the path forward and more in a moment, but I do want to ask you what example of toxic hockey culture really has just stayed with you in all of these conversations you had and that you wrote about?
Yeah, good question. One of them, it's just, there's so many, right? One anecdote that I wrote about that really stands out to me was I was playing a hockey game on a Tuesday night in Toronto, and someone said, "Oh, you should talk to this man, Tom Patterson. His son played junior A hockey, and it was an amazing experience for him." So I sought out Tom, and he told me his son's experience was 10 out of 10. Amazing. And I said, I'd love to hear about it. I want to hear the good stories as well as the troubling stories. So we had breakfast in Westhead, Toronto, near where I live, with Tom and his son, Marcus. And Marcus, for the first time, told his father at this breakfast table about going through this initiation called the hot box. And that meant that one night on the team bus going back to his home arena after a road trip, he and the other first-year players were tapped on the shoulder, and they were told to go back to the back of the bus and strip, and all of them had to jam into the bathroom at the back of the bus. The lights were turned off. Someone threw in some coins, and the 5 or 6, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds that were in there at the same time without their clothes on, all had to try to scramble to figure out where this money was so they could come up with the exact change amount. He figured that they were in there for about half an hour. I've heard that story so many times. I've heard it from players, who've talked about it in the 1990s and the early 2000s. Marcus played junior hockey in 2019. So this tells us, this is proof in his own words, that there's still issues. There are still things like this going on under the noses of head coaches who are sitting on buses who must know what's happening behind them.
Obviously, you were the one, as we mentioned, that broke the news about the 5 players, Michael McLeod, Dylan Dubé, Cal Foote, Alex Formanton, and Carter Hart, who were accused of sexual assault and acquitted. What were you thinking when you first read EM's accusations?
I thought it was horrible. I thought it was, and as you say, those players were acquitted after a 2-month trial. It's interesting, how social media can be, right? The opinions are very splintered. You do have some people who say, oh, well, look at these boys were vindicated, and that's evidence that everything here is fine, and this is much ado about nothing. Well, the NHL didn't take that approach. I mean, the NHL said that what happened in that hotel room, despite the verdict, was unacceptable and inappropriate. And in fact, I could read you, I could spend the next 5 minutes listing a series of issues that have happened even since I started reporting on this in 2022. By my count, there's at least 6 players who played major junior hockey who are now in jail since 2022 because of sexual assault allegations. Not to mention the dozens of cases of sexual related hazing and misconduct that are going on in minor hockey that are reported on. We don't even know how many more are going on that aren't reported on because Hockey Canada still is one of those institutions that refuses to make sanctions for misconduct public. So, I think there's so much evidence that this is still a real issue.
So about the path forward then, do you see an option to have young players, just because you spoke about it, have an option to maybe be home as part of the solution? And if so, not just that, what else do you think is could be the path forward?
Well, I'm not sure about how. My gut is that the major junior leagues would be quite resistant to that. But two other examples, if I could share them, that I think are really give me reason for optimism. In Hamilton, Ontario, I went down and I watched the Hamilton Steel AAA team and the Hamilton Huskies AA team. And they have partnered with an organization called Coaching Boys into Men. And so the coaches of teams are actually taught about how to speak to these young players about issues of consent and how healthy masculinity looks like. And so I sat in these modules in these dressing rooms and watched as these boys who weren't even 13 were having conversations and engaged in wanting to have these conversations with their coaches about consent issues. This season, 16 teams in the Steel and Huskies organization are doing that program. And, I know that some people might say, well, those are conversations parents should be having. And that's absolutely true. Parents should be having those conversations. But the fact is they're uncomfortable and many parents don't have them. And we know that in many instances, their conversations are not happening in school anyway. So maybe looking forward, hockey and sports more broadly can be an area, where we are committed kind of as a community to raising not only the best athletes, but also the best people, helping these players be the best versions of themselves. I mentioned one other example. In the Ontario Hockey League, the Peterborough Petes have a program where they've brought in somebody who's trained on issues like this to have unfettered access to their players. Most junior teams, if they do consent training at all, will have somebody come in once a year for an hour in September. They spend that hour, they talk about consent. Maybe they show this video about consent that I think many people are familiar with, and that's it. But in Peterborough, they've said, no, we need to do more, and they're opening their doors. And that's really interesting because it gives the man in that job, Luke Ben Veldson's his name, a chance to really build trust with players, show them that he's invested and he's there day by day. And really, maybe that's the best way to convince players to be vulnerable and open up about the things that they're navigating.
It's quite a book, Rick. Thank you very much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for the great interview. Appreciate it.
I'm the author of We Breed Lions, Confronting Canada's Troubled Hockey Culture. The book's out now, but he's going to be in Winnipeg November 27th and McNally Robinson at Grant Park for the launch.